it's a beautiful day outside at the very least. So make sure that after our class session is over today, that you get outside and soak up some of that vitamin D because you're going to need to stay strong over the next few days. Um, uh, as promised, we have yet one more visiting speaker here today that we're thrilled to have. Hughes-Castleberry, who is a recent graduate from the University of Iowa. Thank you so much for being here, especially on this day, to speak to us and to answer some of our questions. We are very excited to have you. So Kenna, I'm going to kind of let you introduce yourself and talk for a little while. And then we've got a couple of folks who are going to kick off our Q&A. And then most of the rest of the time will just be questions for you, either via the video feature, or feel free to throw questions into the chat at any time. So Kenna, again, thank you for being here, and please do take it away.
Thanks. Hi guys. I know like nobody likes sitting in online classes, especially right now, just with the election and everything. So please feel free to like get up, move around, not pay attention to me if you want. But if you do pay attention, you might learn something, and hopefully that'll be good too. I did not actually graduate from the University of Iowa. I'm from Colorado. I went to Iowa for 2 years and then transferred back to Colorado State University and finished my degrees there. I do have my bachelor's are in English and botany, and then I have a master's degree that I just finished in science communication. So my focus is like how science writing and like science fiction gets communicated to the public and the accuracy of that. My current jobs, I work in digital marketing. So I do a bunch of social media marketing, as well as blog writing, blog editing, content writing, website design, website development, just kind of anything like that. Yay, botany people. Okay, I love it. Sorry, I will try not to get distracted by the chat, but I'm sure all of us kind of do, because you see something and you're like, oh, this is cool. So I apologize if I get off topic slightly. So I do marketing, and that's kind of where I use my English degree, is like blog writing and like using the way of doing concise information and bullet points, like how you read a normal blog. You just look at the bullet points and then you read the paragraph afterwards if you care to or have time to. So that's what I do for my career. In my free time, however, I have several podcasts as well as a blogcast. So my blogcast is based on interviewing science writers around the world and just talking to them about their books. And I've been able to do that thanks to COVID, just because like everybody is stuck at home. And it's been really nice because I'll just reach out to people and they're like, I don't know you, you're some random person, but sure, you can interview me, whatever. So that's been really, really nice to do and have. So I'll have a little blog about the book that I'm interviewing the person on, and then the interview right afterwards so people can listen to it. And I just wanted to start that just because like I did my master's degree in London, and I moved back when COVID hit because I was afraid I was going to get stuck in the country. And I was like, I'm not British. I don't know the healthcare system over there. Like, I know the US healthcare system, so I might as well move back home. So I came back and I was like, I really want to start this blogcast where I have like a community of people who love reading science books and just want to know more about them. So I started that. I also do podcasting. So I have a couple podcasts. I have one where I interview young people in science and talk about like their opinions and what it's like to be a person in science. I know that doesn't at all relate to all of us because we're all English people, and science is gross and blah, 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 that sort of thing. And then my other one is more of a biography thing about the lives of scientists, and using storytelling to like communicate really hard science topics. So if you can't tell, I love science, but I also love writing. That's why I'm here. So I do a lot of podcast writing as well. And I'm happy to talk about what it's like to write for a podcast, and just kind of design things like that. So you get more of that storytelling in there. Podcasts, are very interesting in that they don't obviously have the visual aspect. You just have the audio. So you never end up actually having like that audio piece. So you have to be way more descriptive in your writing. for podcasts, which is actually really, really helpful. So if you're a really descriptive writer in the first place, you can really, really shine at podcasts. So like you'll notice that if you listen to podcasts, you'll notice that a lot of times if somebody's doing an interview with somebody in a podcast, they'll be like, I'm sitting here in the office of so-and-so, and there's a lot of books around me, and there's a desk and a table, and they're just describing the scene for you because you can't see it. So that's what I've learned a lot from doing podcasting is you have to be very, very descriptive in your writing. So yeah, is anybody doing NaNoWriMo this year at all? National Novel Writing Month? Yeah, okay, I love it. I'm doing that too. So yeah, yay everybody. We can all like stress about it together, but at least it's good, you know, get our practice on. Yeah, the biggest thing I would say, like clearly I use my English major in my jobs and in my free time, but like always, if you can, like keep working at it, like keep writing. If you want to be a writer, like no matter what you're doing, like if you're doing podcasting, that's a form of writing. If you're doing documentary making, that's a form of writing. If you're doing like plays, obviously that's a form of writing, or novels. Like that's my best advice to you, is to like just keep working at it and keep doing what you want to do, and like get the practice in there, because that'll be really, really important. Especially just how things change, like because of COVID, everybody's working online. Which is really, really good for English majors. And the way I mean that is like you can easily sell yourself better as a remote worker than in person, because people like save money with remote workers because they don't have to drive and pay for gas and like commute. But like as an English writer, you can be like, hey, I'm also a freelancer and I can work at whatever hours you want, and I'm just working in my house. And it's very easy to do that with COVID. Like for me, I came home from another country. I had no jobs, and I was like, I want a job because I'm here for a while and I don't know when I'm going back, if ever. And so you just kind of walk into a job, or like see if there's anything that's open, and just like start selling yourself for that opening. Like if there's a job for a blog writer, be like, cool, I write blogs. Like I do that all the time. I'm happy to do that. Or if you don't, like start doing stuff now that'll give you that work experience, like blog writing, like doing a podcast, like writing a novel, stuff like that, that'll have like great work experience that you can add to your resume and be like, yeah, I did this. Like I didn't get paid to do it, but I have the skills and experience to do it. So yeah, that's kind of me in a nutshell. Sorry, I speak quickly, so I apologize if people like got cut in and out. My Wi-Fi is also terrible because I'm close to the mountains. So if I start glitching up, please tell me and I'll just repeat something. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kenna, for that introduction to all the wonderful things that you do. If I can just chime in and say that blogging can be a really wonderful way to help to start building your career. I did the same thing when I was first hired at Iowa. I still have a website with tons and tons of super nerdy, super awesome posts about old books that I found in our special collections library. And that really helped kind of build my profile in my chosen profession, far beyond the bounds of Iowa City. So I think it's totally awesome what you're doing. So, all right, folks, it sounds like we probably have a number of questions for Kenna. So please ask away, either raise your hand or throw something in the chat, or just unmute yourself and go for it. Sounds good? Cool. Go for it.
I have a question, actually.
Sure.
So I know you talked about like, writing different things like for blogs versus podcasts and stuff like that. How, like, if you're just starting out trying to kind of write a new, like, format, like trying to write for podcasts, trying to write for blogs, whatever it is, like, how do you recommend learning about kind of the style of that writing?
That's a great question, actually. So I think I'll do blogs and then I'll do podcasts because they're kind of separate. But like for blogs, the best way I recommend learning how to write a good blog, besides just Googling like how to write a good blog, is just reading blogs that you like. So I'm trying to think of who it is. There's a really good writer. I think it's Amy Stewart. She wrote this book called The Drunken Botanist, which is all about like how plants turn into alcohol. And she has a blog that's ongoing. And so like when I first started thinking about doing this blogcast, I was like, I kind of want to find something that's similar to that. Like this idea of doing that. So I just read her blog. Like, I don't know if anybody has read the book On Writing by Stephen King. I'd highly recommend reading it if you haven't. But he talks about how like what you read at the moment ends up being mirrored in your writing. So like if you're reading a really good blog, it ends up being mirrored in the blog that you write. So that's kind of why like it's a good idea to read really good examples of what you want to try to do. So like something similar to your idea. The same goes with podcasts. Like podcasts are a little bit harder because they're just audio. Like it's not like you have the script in front of you. But with podcasts, like if you listen to enough of them, you can start to get the format down pretty well. So like most podcasts have, depending on what podcast you're listening to, most of them have an intro scene. So like a couple of the podcasts I listen to are based off of like serial killers and unsolved murders, because that's just what I'm into and I'm morbidly weird. I apologize. But it's fine, whatever. Anyway, so like they have an intro scene where like they set the scene for a story, like you're in this scene watching this character do something. And then they'll have like sound effects in there or music. Yes, podcast. Yes, whoever asked that, thank you. Yes, it's those. And so they have the music, and then right after that, they have the introduction where they say, you know, this is Unsolved Murders by Parcast, blah, blah, blah. And I'm your host, blah, blah, blah. And then after that, they go into the tags, what's called tagging. So after that, they'll say, you know, you can find this podcast on your favorite platforms, such as Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And then they'll go into something like, make sure to share or subscribe or give a like. And then after that, they'll go straight into the episode. And usually at the end of the episode, they'll have credits or who they're referencing or whatever. So that's kind of the basic outline of a podcast episode. Again, things are going to change depending on what podcast you're listening to, but most of them are going to have those introductory, like, here's the podcast you're listening to, here's hosting it, and here's the tags of where you can find it. So that's kind of what I would recommend if you want to start out by listening to podcasts and just kind of get that idea. And then from there, there's a really good book actually here, since I'm in my room with all my books. It's called Out on the Wire. It's really interesting because it's like a graphic novel. So it's a cartoon, but it's also all about how to make a podcast. And so they talk about different things with podcasting, like sound editing, sound effects, music, like way more than you need for like writing a podcast. But if you actually are serious about going into podcasting, that's probably the book to read. It's really hands-on, really practical, really good. So yeah. Does that answer your question? Sorry.
Yes, thank you so much.
No, I was just going to second the recommendation for Out on the Wire. I don't podcast myself yet, but I love that book. It's great. So
yeah, it's really good. I'll answer a couple of questions in the group chat since I don't want to forget about you guys. Yes, I am in Boulder. Thank you, Paige, for asking. I love Boulder. Boulder's great. If anybody wants a break from the Iowa corn, highly recommend. We have awesome mountains. How long have I been doing NaNoWriMo? I've been doing it for like 5 or 6 years. I've self-published 2 of my novels when I started doing it, but they weren't that good. I mean, everybody can tell, like, as you age, your writing gets better and better just because you have more life experience to draw from, as well as, like, you just become a better writer. So that's why, like, I recommend just keep working at your writing because, like, obviously it's going to keep growing and get better with that. Okay, what goes into a podcast specifically? I hope I already answered this question for you, but if you want anything else with that, just let me know. Let's see. How did I self-publish a book? So there's multiple self-publishing platforms that you can use. Barnes & Noble has their own press you can go through and they can actually sell your book in the stores. You can also go through, the other one I did was lulu.com, but there's a lot of them out there. You just have to be aware with self-publishing that you're going to have to pay for the book to be printed if you're ordering it yourself. It's a print on demand. But besides that, like it's, if you obviously sell enough books, you'll start to create more of a following and an actual publisher could pick it up, which is really good for any author. But yeah, just keep that in mind. So, okay, this is a really good question. How do you look for work? Thank you, Luke, for asking that. And how did you decide on my specific lines of work? So how do you look for work? This is a really good question and a very broad question. So first off, I'd recommend obviously choosing like the career you want to go into. Like for me, I originally was going to be a novelist, but I was like, I also really like science, and novelists don't really make that much money unless you're Stephen King or J.K. Rowling. So I'll just do both, and then I'll try to like combine them later in life. And that's kind of worked out for me. And then I got into podcasting in my master's degree, and I was like, now I just kind of want to do podcasting. Like that's really fun. So I would recommend like trying out a few things first and like figuring out what you want to do as a career, and then kind of chasing that. Like look into what is required to be that person. Like if you're wanting to go and be a publisher, what is required to become a publisher? Like, do you have to go apprentice at a publishing press? Do you have to, take magazine writing courses? Like things like that. Like more practically, like if you're more at the end of that, where you like have all the classes, you have the degree, you're like, cool, now what? I would recommend looking for internships. Internships are great. A lot of them are remote thanks to COVID. And like, especially with the English degree, it's really nice because a lot of them are going to be remote anyway, because you're just writing. So, that's really nice. So like, if you're looking for an internship, like look across the US, like don't stop yourself from just staying in Iowa. Like be like, cool, this is in a different time zone, but who cares? Like, this sounds like an awesome internship. I'm going to try it. So like try something like that. Obviously gain some work experience by like doing blogs, doing more of like your own projects, because that shows like future employers, like I have the initiative and the drive to do my own thing. And that looks really good on a resume. Like you're going to stand out really, really well. The other thing I would recommend practicality wise is make sure your LinkedIn looks really good. If you don't have a LinkedIn, get one. Like even if you don't have anything on there, like even if you're like, I have no job experience, like I literally just worked at McDonald's in high school, that's okay. Like you can always put your classes down as work experience. That's what I used to do until I graduated. Because obviously your classes teach you a lot of like hands-on information. Like if you're taking a novel writing class, that's going to help you to know how to edit something and how to like work in teams and like work with other people. So you can like rewrite your classes to look like work skills. So yeah, that's what I'd recommend for LinkedIn. Obviously update your resume. Like your resume shouldn't be more than like 1 to 2 pages max. So if you're like me, where you like list everything you did and it turns out it's 5 pages long, obviously you need to cut it. Cover letters, make sure those are obviously really good. And like usually for me, I have 2 to 3 cover letters. I'll just change up depending on what job I'm looking at. So like if the job is more sciencey focused, I'll have more of a sciencey cover letter as opposed to like a writing cover letter. Yeah, just get on job sites like Indeed. LinkedIn has great job sites as well. Like just keep your ear to the ground and like make sure you know what's going on in your field too. Like having the knowledge of like how your field is changing or like what you want to do and how it's changing, and like being an expert in that will be really helpful. So like for me with marketing, like marketing is going way more to digital because of COVID. Like it already was, but now it's even more so. And like knowing how to use digital marketing has put me ahead compared to other people, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's kind of like the best advice I could give you for finding a job. As far as like specific lines of work, again, just like look at what you do for like what you love to do and what you want to do for a career. Like if you want to be an astronaut, obviously you're going to want to go and like get a science degree first off and then train to become an astronaut. Or if you want to become a novelist, like make sure you have that training in like novel writing to then start that process. Did that answer your question, Luke? Hopefully it did. Cool. So how did I learn digital marketing? Kate asked this one. So digital marketing is something that you can learn in 2 ways. You can learn it from like actual classes, but you can also learn it from experience. So like all of us, if you're under a certain age, have a social media. All of us do. You can always practice with your social media and call it digital marketing. Whether like for me, like when I first started my podcast, I used my social media to market my podcast. And that's a way to like call yourself a digital marketer, is you're practicing with your own stuff. And then from there you can grow and do like other things. I would recommend, if you are thinking of doing like social media marketing, digital marketing, or even just wanting something that is a way to like make professional business cards or resumes, using something called Canva. It's free, it's online, it's like Adobe Suites, but you don't have to pay for it. It's 100% like just awesome to have, because like all the templates can like be utilized and like manipulated however you want. So I'd highly recommend using that if you're looking for something that's more professional to do. So yeah, digital marketing classes though, you can find a lot wherever, honestly. Like LinkedIn has a bunch. Unfortunately, I think you have to pay for them. But a lot of times, even if you just YouTube like digital marketing, like how to be a digital marketer, stuff pops up everywhere. So like that's the nice thing about COVID and the internet, is you can learn a lot while you're just sitting at home doing nothing. So hopefully that answered your question. Okay, how did you sell yourself to an employer that you could do what they wanted you to do? Okay, sorry, that question was a little lengthy. Okay, good. People love Canva. Awesome, that's awesome. So selling yourself to an employer is looking at the 3 basic things in writing. So implication, target audience, and purpose. So looking at your target audience, who is hiring you? Like, who do you want to go work for? So like for me, like, let's say I want to go work for a laboratory. Like clearly I want to know what they're looking for. Like obviously they want somebody who's done research. You know, how can I sell myself in that way? Well, I'll talk about my previous classes where I've done research, like something like that, if that makes sense. So like, let's say you want to go work for a magazine. You know, sell yourself in a way where you're going to show that you have more magazine writing experience, whether you've taken magazine courses or you do digital photography, or you're familiar with Adobe Suites and you do InDesign all the time. Like things like that is going to be a really good selling point to people who want to hire you, if that makes sense. Cool. Any other questions?
While all of our students come up with even more questions for you, I've got just like a kind of curious practical question, which is, could you talk a little bit about the kind of logistical nitty-gritty things of making your own podcast?
Yeah, totally. Absolutely.
I would love to hear about kind of how you go about doing that.
Yeah. So podcasting is actually pretty easy to do, which is really nice. And with COVID, you know, so many people are doing podcasting already, but so many people are now doing it from home. So they're not expecting like high quality radio equipment. I used to do podcasting in a studio, and then of course I moved back home, and now this is my studio. So first off, I'd say if you're going to be a podcaster, obviously get a good microphone. So this one is mine. It's a condenser. I just literally sit at my desk and record. It's got a nice spit guard on it. That's literally what this is called, so that if you spit out your microphone, it doesn't get damaged. And then you can plug in headphones, that sort of thing. I'd recommend being in a room where either you have books, which all of us are English majors, we have at least 1 to 2 books. If you don't, you're crazy, get out. So I'd recommend being in a room with books because they absorb the sound, or something with like a pillow / table, or not table, like a pillow / mattress. So like I'm actually also in my bedroom. So my bed's on the other side of the room. So that helps with echoing. So the books, you know, take in some of the sound, the bed takes in some of the sound. So it doesn't make things so echoey, because that's really, really hard to edit out of a podcast to make it sound good. If you don't have either of those, what you can do is like get a towel and drape it over your microphone, and like over your desk and wherever you're recording, because that will also absorb a lot of that sound. Let's see what else. For recording like software, obviously Adobe has Adobe Premiere. They do their own recording software, and you can edit it in there if you want. I ended up using Audacity. That's just what I've like grown up with, and it's super easy. It's free, so you can just download it, and then you can easily just play around with the sound levels, whatever you want. And it's really easy to use as far as like mixing and editing and things like that. Yeah, that's probably most of the basics for podcasting. Other than that, it's just like figuring out the content that you want to do. Oh, for distribution of the podcast, like let's say you want to put it out on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, like and have people listen to it. I'd recommend using like something like Buzzsprout or Anchor. Anchor's free, Buzzsprout you have to pay for, but you upload your episode, like your MP3 file to that, and then they'll distribute it to all these other platforms. So it's really helpful. So people can actually find your podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or whatever. Does that answer your question? Okay, cool.
Awesome. Yeah,
Awesome.
that was fantastic.
Good. Okay, great. So I have a couple other questions in the chat that I'll answer, and then anybody else, please jump in. I am happy to talk about literally anything. Let's see. How did you find your niche audience for your podcast? So that's a really good question. So first off, I would recommend if you are going to make a podcast, like first off, Google or like search on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Make sure your title isn't taken if you have a title in mind, but also like look at what other podcasts are in that genre. So like for me, like one of my podcasts is a history and biography podcast. So I looked up like what else was in there. And I found out like nobody else was doing biographies of scientists. And I was like, okay, cool. I'll just start this since there's not really other ones out there. And so like I would start there. And then like from there, you can kind of determine based off your subject matter who your target audience is. So like for me, like if I'm doing a episode about, let's say, science writer Michael Crichton, like Jurassic Park guy. Obviously, like I know my audience for that is going to be people who love dinosaurs and Jurassic Park, but also people who grew up with the Jurassic Park movies, which is a really big audience because it's like 1980s to even now because they're still making them. So like that's who I know my target audience is. And then from there, I can determine what I'm going to write the podcast about. So obviously I would focus it more on Jurassic Park because that's what people are going to know most. But then I can kind of circle over to Michael Crichton's other works and talk more about his other books and his contribution to science writing. Does that help? So yeah, just look up what podcasts are in the genre you want to work in, and then also like titles and whatnot, and just see what's already out there and see from there like what you can uniquely contribute and not copy anybody else's. Okay, as a science writer, what has been your experience with literary magazines? Ooh, that's a really good question. So for science writing in particular, you have a lot of options for literary magazines. To be fair, there's a lot of options in general for magazines. But for science writers, because most people for science writing pick one topic and focus on the science of it, so like a lot of people do the topic of climate change or sea turtles or like flowers, it's very easy to take your topic that you're writing about and then sell it to a literary magazine, especially like the weirder the topic, the more likely it's going to sell. Like if I'm talking about reproducing slugs, like obviously it's going to sell really well to a science writing magazine because they'll be like, well, most of our stories are on climate change or global warming or glaciers melting. So this will be new and unique. So I would say like the best advice with magazines, first off, like deadlines are super important because magazines have deadlines changing all the time. And you want to make sure you keep on top of those. So like either bookmark a magazine that you want to submit to and like make sure you go back to it to check on the deadlines, or like if they have contests, obviously like make sure your writing fits the contest rules and the genre. But also like just make sure that your topics and stories that you want to write about for a magazine are really unique and really like you and just very different is probably the best way I can describe it. Because that way you stand out. And like you want to make sure you reflect yourself within your writing. Like don't pretend to be somebody else, but like make sure that the topics you choose are really interesting and engaging to people and haven't already like been nitpicky covered a lot, if that makes sense. Okay, what is your research processing like, and how long do you spend researching before beginning a book, blog post, or podcast? Oh, geez. That's a good question. So for podcasting, it depends on how frequently you're doing podcast episodes and releasing them. So for me, I used to do every week for a podcast episode release, which means I had 1 week to get all my research in order, write the script, record, and sound edit, which was a lot. Now I do every other week. So I do like 2 episodes a month, which still is a lot. Like it's still it's a little looser of a timeline structure, but it's still a lot. So for me, I try to give myself a week to fully research who I'm talking about, whether it's the subject or like a book. If I'm reading a book and interviewing an author, I try to give myself a week to just digest the material and make sure I really know what I'm talking about. And then after that, or within that same week, I'll write the script. And script writing doesn't actually take that long for podcasts, just because if you get in that rhythm of like getting the tags in, getting the intro scene in, like finishing it off, especially if you have 2 hosts as well. Most podcasts that are successful have 2 or more people speaking in them. So it's not just me talking, it'll be somebody else. You have a nice back and forth there, so it's pretty easy to write. It's like writing dialogue. And then after that, it's just recording, sound editing, and then releasing. And I try to do that within 2 weeks. Some podcasts do it every week. Some podcasts do it twice a week, or some podcasts do it like once a month. So it really just depends on your timeline and how flexible you are. Yeah, if that answers your question. For a blogcast, I try to, for me, I guess with reaching out to so many authors, I just do like a bunch of blanket emails to a bunch of authors that I want to interview, even if they don't know me. And even if I'm going through like Penguin to like get to them, I'll just keep emailing them over and over again until they get really annoyed. And then they're either like, we're too busy, or they'll be like, okay, fine, whatever, you wore me down, I'll let you interview me. So that's kind of, you have to figure that in your timeline. Like if you do want to interview somebody famous, make sure to keep persistently bothering them until they either tell you they're too busy for you or they actually agree to an interview. So like for me, like, does anybody know Robert Charles Wilson, the famous science fiction writer? I was able to interview him, and I had to reach out to him multiple times because he's very private and doesn't like people bothering him. But he finally was like, okay, fine, whatever, you can interview me because you've emailed me too many times. So yeah, that's what I'd recommend if you're deciding to interview somebody good or like somebody really famous. Like let's say you're writing a magazine article about them, keep that in your timeline of just like, they may not get back to you for a while, if ever. But besides that, yeah, just give yourself like a week or 2 to read a book and then interview the person and then edit. With interviews, I also try to send the interviewee my edited material so that they can approve it. Because the last thing you want is somebody who you've interviewed and they're like, I don't like the way this question sounded, or there's a weird noise in the background. Like you want to send it to them afterwards and be like, hey, I need your approval on this, or like, does this sound okay? So I try to do that, and then they'll get back to me and say like, yes, this is fine, or like, can you fix this? And that's just good practice to have. That's really ethical. Like you don't have any mean people chasing you or anything like that. But you have to figure that in your timeline as well. So it could be like 2 to 3 weeks before you actually have a finished interview that you want to use, if that makes sense. Sorry, I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, but yeah. Cool. Any other questions that people have? Oh, what does your writing process look like? Ooh, that's a really good question. It depends on what I'm writing. So for NaNoWriMo, I am really old-fashioned and I do a pen and paper. So it takes forever to write a novel because then you have to type up each chapter. But I consider it the best form of like an initial edit because I call it the Ernest Hemingway method, where Hemingway did that, where he literally rewrote his entire books from scratch, which is a really good way to edit, but it's really painful and it takes forever. Yeah, so I'm glad I'm not the only one who does that. But for writing a novel, I also have each chapter plotted out. So I'll have a couple paragraphs about what's going to happen in this chapter and, you know, who's talking to who and what is kind of the background. So you can go chapter by chapter and be like, okay, here's what's happening in this chapter and here's how it's contributing to the bigger picture. For a podcast, my writing process is a little bit more condensed because I know the rhythm. So I'll start by, writing out the intro scene. I might not actually fill it in until I've done all my research, but then I can do, the introduction to the podcast, the tags, and then start writing all the information. And then at the end, have like the sign off or whatever. So it's a lot easier for that. For a blogcast, it's mainly just like a paragraph introducing the book and then my opinion of it and like why I read it, and then talking a little bit about the interview and then introducing the interview below. So that's kind of what my writing process looks like. Everybody's going to be different, obviously. And there's a lot of great tools out there that you can use to like plot out novels or plot out essays or articles or whatever you need, if that helps. Yeah. Cool. Any other questions that people have? I'm loving it. You guys are so awake today, which is great. I'm still digesting my coffee.
I have another question for you.
Sure.
Especially because earlier you said that you listed your classes on your resume. I'm just wondering, like, what aspects of your English major, like, what would you say, especially in retrospect, did you end up using the most, or what did you find most valuable? Since everyone here is still in the midst of their English major, I was just wondering if you could say a couple things about that.
Or what do you wish you would have done or added?
Yeah, exactly. Great. That's a great question.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think for the English major, so what I used the most on, say, like a resume, is definitely the classes where I had to do research to essay writing, because a lot of jobs have that perspective where you have to take the raw data or the raw research or like a meeting with a client and then write it up as like some other form, like a recap email or like follow-up notes or a proposal, something like that. Like the classes where you take raw information and then distill it down into your own writing were the classes I found the most helpful and the ones that I ended up putting on my resume the most. So like for me, it was using my, if anybody here is in honors, using my honors thesis, which was a huge research process that I was able to distill down into, a 40-page paper or whatever. Besides that, I would definitely I did definitely put some of my creative writing classes on my resume when I first started out graduating, just because it shows that you're a creative person. And also like you're able to think of new ideas, which is huge in the world of not only marketing, but no matter what field you go in, like you want to show that you have your own perspective and you can give fresh ideas and new ways of doing things. So that definitely helps. I would definitely recommend as well, like adding some sort of time management piece, because the English major is a lot of time management. Like granted, a lot of us are procrastinators, which is fine. But you switch the word procrastination for deadline motivated. That's how you should definitely write it in a resume, is like, I'm motivated by deadlines. So yeah, that would be something I'd recommend, is just like adding stuff like that. Or just like if you have some writing you're proud of and you are applying to somewhere that they ask for written work, use that as well. Yeah. So there's another question in the chat besides the Dobby shirt question. Yes, whoever asked that, well done. You were very good about picking things out. Have the people you interviewed ever decided they didn't want it out or wanted heavy edits? Yeah, that's a really good question. So I haven't ever had somebody who I've interviewed, recorded it, sent it to them, and they say, this is terrible, please don't ever let this out in the public. I haven't had that, but I have had people where they're like, can you please edit this? Or like, I sound really bad here. Can you fix that? And unfortunately with like sound editing, there's only so much you can do. So a lot of times I'll tell people like, I can redo that question with you if you want at a later time, and you can rephrase this answer if you don't like the way you sounded, or like, if there's something wrong with this, I can fix it. But to a certain extent, there's only so much you can do with sound editing. And most people are pretty understanding about that. I had an interview with a documentary writer or documentary maker. When was it? Like a month ago. And he was talking to me about Michael Crichton, because we got on the subject of Jurassic Park. And he was telling me all this like secret stuff about Michael Crichton that like nobody knew. And he was like, "Are you recording this?" And I'm like, "No." And it turns out that I was. I forgot to hit the button, but I just ended up deleting the rest of it because I was like, I can't, release any of this because I gave him my word I wasn't recording. So that, yeah, if you are interviewing people, make sure that you obviously do the ethical thing of asking them permission, making sure they approve the recording. If you do end up accidentally recording something that they don't want on the record, delete it, stuff like that. Yeah, if that answers your question. Cool. Any other questions?
I have one. Sorry, I don't look too great, but what is your transition period between your undergraduate and then work, and then when did you decide to go back for your master's degree, and how did that go?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Timeline of that, and how stress-wise it helped or hindered you in your work?
Yeah. So I ended up, my timeline was really weird in the sense that because I was double majoring, I was working like a lot of classes. I think my final semester I took like 25 semester hours, which like I had to get like special permission from like the dean of the school to do. And I was like, I know I'm gonna die, but it'll be fine. Like it's just the last semester. I didn't really sleep that much that semester, but that's okay. That's another story. Anyway, after I finished my undergrad, like the last semester, I was like, I really don't want to go into the workforce. I feel too young, and like I feel like I don't really have any like skills, or like I'm not entirely sure what I want to do. So I'm just gonna do a master's degree. And the master's degree I picked was a 1-year master's degree in London. And I was like, cool, I get to live in London for a year. Like I can't complain by that. So yeah, while I was in my last semester of undergrad, I submitted a whole bunch of grad school applications. But granted, like if you want to take like a year or two break, like that's totally fine. Like there is no end goal of when you should finish education. Like you can finish education when you're 90. And some people do, and it's great. So there's really no like I have to graduate with my master's before I'm 30 or whatever. There's nothing like that. For me, yeah, I got into, I think it was 10 different grad schools, but like half of them were in the UK, and it was just figuring out which one I wanted to do. And I finally just picked Imperial College in London. The most stressful part was finding a house because I wasn't over there and it's in a separate country. And there's just a lot of different moving parts where you're like, I don't have a bank over there. I'd have to, do some sort of like transfer, stuff like that. Kate, that's a really good question as far as funding. UK schools are really terrible about international funding. They are notoriously bad for hating Americans, which is really, really sad because there are a lot of great schools over there. But the system is very, very much set up against you getting a good like funding for your education and then staying over there and getting a job. Like the way they've set up their visa system for you to get like a student visa as well as a job is just really, really difficult. So like that was kind of an encouragement for me when I got over there, where I was like, I kind of want to just move back to the States. Like I can easily find a job, and like I love the mountains and stuff. Yes, yeah, their taxes pay for their schools. So yeah, I can't blame them either. But yeah, so that was the most stressful part, was finding a house, but also like completing the visa process in time and like getting that going, just because I had graduated in the summer and I was supposed to start my master's degree in October. So I didn't even have like my diploma for a good month and a half, and they needed that for my school. So it was just a lot of moving parts, and it was pretty stressful. As far as work goes, I worked at Barnes and Noble like my last 2 years of undergrad, and then my like that summer before I left. And I love it. If people want to work in a bookstore, I highly recommend you do. Not only just because like it's great and you meet a bunch of nerds and you're around books all day, but you also can easily tell a publisher or whoever, if you're like writing a magazine or like selling a novel, you can be like, look, I know the business. I've worked in a bookstore. Like I know how to sell a book, and like I know what is going to sell. So that's partially why I worked in a bookstore. But yeah, then I was easily able, once I got over to London, to work at Harrods in their bookstore. And that was really fun and kind of crazy. So yeah, as far as the timeline goes, like I just did like normal retail work that you usually do as an undergrad. And then after my master's degree, I came back here and got like 2 normal jobs, which is weird. Any other questions that people have about anything? I will literally answer any question.
Well, if there are no more questions, we're just a couple minutes away from the end of our class time. So I think we can say and give a big virtual round of applause to Kenna for zooming in with us today. This was really, really fantastic. I think we learned all sorts of wonderful things about your career and the various things that you do, which are really awesome.
Thanks. I will put my email in the chat. If anybody does have any more questions, please feel free to reach out. I literally can answer whatever you have. So. Cool. Well, thank you so much, guys. I will let you get back to class and do what you do. Hang in there, everybody.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much.
Bye.
All right, folks. Stay strong. Get some rest. Take care of yourselves. Soak up some sunshine. Use a sun lamp. Do the things that you need to do to be well. And I'll see you back here next Wednesday.